the more one looks into what's coming out in these files, the more sleazy and the more names appear. In fact, it's not just, I mean, even Donald Trump keeps finding his name brought up in context.
What is there to report, Sarah, where the Epstein files are concerned? The laws in place for these papers, the endless thousands of documents and pieces of evidence to be made public. We don't yet know precisely what will be made public. There are reasons why not all of it, by any means, will be. We do know that so far, Andrew Mountbatten Windsor has not fallen over himself to cooperate with the Congressional Committee into Epstein.
Yeah, I don't expect Andrew Mountbatten Windsor to show his face in America anytime soon. He's just can't take the risk of landing on American soil, and he's going
or even contribute from here or wherever he is.
No, he's not. He doesn't have to. He can't be compelled to, unlike a US citizen who is subpoenaed to appear before Congress. So he's not going to, in my view. But obviously, I think he should do the right thing and volunteer, but that hasn't been his modus operandi thus far, so I don't suppose it's going to change soon. Regarding the disclosure of the Epstein files, I mean, this one is going to run and run. It's already causing huge rips in the MAGAverse, and with enmity now between Marjorie Taylor Greene and Donald Trump, and her own party in Georgia backing her definitively. So it's very interesting the way Epstein manages to rupture so many relationships. But it's also the case that people are very suspicious now that Pam Bondi, the Attorney General, is not going to release all the files. It's going to be a bit of a no-show, a bit as before, where people get heavily redacted documents where they start to say, well, hang on, didn't we know all this already? And they're constantly looking for fresh revelations. And then the other thing that strikes me is, of course, rather like the Me Too scandal, because Democrats take this kind of sexual depredation more seriously perhaps than some Republicans do, they're the ones falling on their sword, such as Larry Summers, a former economic advisor to Barack Obama, former president of Harvard, is having to give up all sorts of roles in public affairs and boardships, etc. He's no longer going to be contributing to the New York Times because he's named in the Epstein files. I mean, of course, we know what happened to our own Lord Mandelson, no longer UK ambassador. But, you know, Trump people have so many allegations against them regarding all kinds of alleged sexual malfeasance that they just seem to be able to steamroll it, and Trump gets away, at least thus far, with saying it's a Democratic hoax and they're more in trouble than the Republicans.
And what would stop all the more documents, or enough documents, or a huge amount of documents coming out, Sarah? Are we talking about the investigation the president's ordered into Bill Clinton and other Democrats being used as a reason not to disclose? Or are we talking about the fact that they're able to keep as under wraps classified material? I'm not quite sure how it would be classified, but would that be it?
I think there are all kinds of excuses being made, and one is exactly the one that you suggested, which is that with ongoing investigations that the president has ordered, although this Department of Justice is supposed to be independent, into Bill Clinton and people like Larry Summers and some Democratic donors, that they think they can then say, because of these court cases, privacy concerns mean we can't release X, Y, and Z. So that's one reason. Another reason is there still seems to be expressions of concern, shall we say, about releasing the names of individuals who may be wrongly swept up into this without due diligence. I don't think that's really bothered anybody in MAGA before either. But there are a host of excuses that can be used to keep delaying and obfuscating, for sure.
And Sarah, whether or not he appears before Congress, which I think is very unlikely, I mean, it's fair to say that for Andrew Mountbatten Windsor, as we now must call him, what is being revealed is not good news, is it?
Well, no. I mean, the more one looks into what's coming out in these files, the more sleazy and the more names appear. In fact, it's not just, I mean, even Donald Trump keeps finding his name brought up in context. I mean, Epstein's brother's now claiming that Epstein talked to Trump by phone in 2016 when Trump won, when they were supposed to have no communications at all. And Andrew, it keeps revealing more and more sleazy things, including an allegation that he had sex with someone, totally unprovable here, by the way, I should say, but that he had sex with one of Epstein's employees, and of course that's taken to mean Virginia Giuffre, but who knows? It could be somebody else.
I mean, it's very interesting, given that he, completely denies any wrongdoing. This is this exchange with a New York Times reporter called Landon Thomas Jr., who was discussing in 2015 with Epstein as a friend or an advisor how Epstein could distance himself from the scandal, and actually just says, he had consensual sex with one of your employees. And I understand he's now rowed back and said that he didn't know himself whether this was the case, but it was what he'd read in the press. Is that right?
Yeah, I mean, we don't know. There's so many allegations, and of course extraordinary excuses as well, mounted by Andrew Mountbatten Windsor, who still claims that the photograph of him with
well, we'll have to watch out. So Sarah Baxter, give me a bit of a perspective from there. There was some early, I suppose, you might have expected it, some sort of speculation. Was this Steve Witkoff, President Trump's envoy in Ukraine, sort of going off, just chancing his arm, talking to those he likes talking to in Moscow and coming up with this? But no, this has very much got Donald Trump's stamp on it, hasn't it?
Yeah, Steve Witkoff is a personal friend of Donald Trump. He's his personally selected envoy and enjoys a very trusting relationship with the president, and that's why European allies are so alarmed, because they don't seem to have been consulted at all over this. And Witkoff has been doing his own thing with Vladimir Putin, and that makes Europe very nervous, and of course Ukraine is feeling very bewildered. The trouble is that President Zelensky has got mired in a corruption scandal in Ukraine that he's trying very hard to extricate himself from, and Russian forces are doing a little bit better than they were before. They still have absolutely no hope of really taking any more territory in a significant way by force, but they're sort of, things go up and down, and at the moment they're winning that war of attrition.
Yeah.
And I put it winning in inverted commas, really. I don't want people to make too much of it. But as soon as Putin gets any whiff of getting the upper hand, he wants to extract maximum concessions. And in Donald Trump, he has somebody who also wants a peace plan. I mean, for goodness sakes, people back in America are screaming about the fact that Trump is spending too much time neglecting America first at the expense of chasing a Nobel Peace Prize, which so far Donald Trump has no signs really of getting. He hasn't landed the big ones quite yet, although some things are going well in Gaza with the UN resolution. So he really wants to land this. Otherwise, he's been ignoring the American economy, as some might say, for nothing. So this is the problem for Ukraine at the moment. You've got Putin, who would like a deal on his own terms that stuffs Ukraine, and Donald Trump, who wants to emerge as the peacemaker.
But isn't it, well, from what we've seen, because the Axios news service in America has been making the running on all of this, I haven't seen any of their detail contradicted. If that's correct, we're talking about a deal in which Russia gets to take hold of territory in eastern Ukraine that they've been unable to take by force. Yeah. It would mean giving Putin exactly what he wants in so many respects, which is in those eastern areas, Russia becomes the official language. The Orthodox Russian Church becomes the official church. There are strict limitations on Ukraine's ability to defend itself, and on it goes. This is another plan for peace, very much, it seems, on Russia's terms. And any thought of Donald Trump, as some were suggesting he might have been a short while ago, getting tougher on Putin, losing patience with Putin, it just seems to have rolled right back again.
Yeah, you just have to hope that this is a negotiating tactic which Europe and Ukraine then vetoes, and then they come in and suggest something that is closer to a ceasefire along present lines, which I think everybody accepts, that Ukraine is going to have to concede some territory because it's also in the same position as Russia, as not being able to really retake territory that it's lost. And one has to be realistic about that. But the idea that Ukraine is going to hand over territory that they have never had to lose, I think is for the birds. They're just not going to do it.
Adam?
I've been struck by two things. One is how I don't think this is, correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't think, Sarah, this is playing particularly big with the American media, probably because they're not that interested in Ukraine. And I do feel that since this plan came out, we should have heard from European leaders rather more strongly than we have done. That
the French Foreign Minister was pretty dismissive in Brussels. They've been meeting.
Yeah, no, I know they've been saying things. There's been a meeting of foreign ministers and they came out and said, well, it's not acceptable for America and Russia to settle this. You have to involve Ukraine. Well, you know, I mean, that's pretty obvious. But I do think it would cost nothing for Britain and America, Britain and the rest of Europe to say it is unacceptable that unprovoked aggression in Europe should be rewarded and that we will not be party to any settlement. And that would mean possibly shouldering more of the burden of of supporting Ukraine. But I mean, that is where we are. Hamish Falconer made a statement in the Commons today and, you know, again reiterated Ukraine's got to be involved. But that, I think, is feebler than actually saying, you know, to Trump quite clearly, this is not going to be settled on your terms as a convenience. And A, and B, if you attempt to force this through, and it's not clear he's got the applications, you were saying earlier on, Congress has actually voted to strengthen tariffs against Russia, but if you were to force this through, that is an absolute bar on getting any Nobel Peace Prize, because it's aggressor's justice, and how could anyone say that was something worthy of receiving an award?
Well, you're quite right, Adam, about the Nobel Peace Prize. But I do think that European leaders, who I'd love to hear more strongly on this subject, but they might well find that if they say to Donald Trump, we're not signing off on this, and we really, you know, you do not have our support on this, he's quite capable of saying, fine, the bill's on you now.
Well, he's more or less done that anyway.
Yeah, but that would be the logical. He could yes, he has. I mean, military aid to Ukraine from America has ceased. He has been in the business of selling weapons, so it's more of an arms dealer than a peace broker in many ways. But he could stop doing even that, which would be a setback. And the European leaders still seem to want to, well, try again to persuade Donald Trump round to their way of thinking.
I think the reason they haven't commented much is because it would draw attention to their own weaknesses. They don't want to draw attention to the fact that they don't seem to be particularly in the tent on this. So that obviously limits the perception of their influence. Yeah. Well, it is, but I think that's they're still obviously aware that the person they need to influence most is Donald Trump. Keir Starmer's certainly aware of that. So I think that's why. But in the context of the G20 about to happen, I mean, it's all quite. It'll be interesting if they can hold that line.
Yeah.
Which America's not going to. America is boycotting G20 because of the claims that white South Africans are suffering persecution. Yeah. Elon Musk's claims.
Okay.
Yes.
Well, Sarah, go ahead.
Well, there's been a rapprochement, by the way, between Elon Musk and Donald Trump after months feuding, and there's no question that Adam is right that Trump has seized on the idea that white South Africans are the most persecuted people in the world and the only ones really deserving of refugee status in America. So you can see where his thinking is going regarding the G20. But you know, on Ukraine, I think another reason, I think Anna's made a wise point there, but another reason why they're holding out and trying to make private remonstrances with Trump, you know, sotto voce, is that Trump does change his mind. And they don't want to say, well, it's all over then for Ukraine just because of Witkoff's latest plan.
Now, it's also fair to say he does appear to change his mind, then he changes it back again and ends up on the path that he seemed to have been on all along, which is one which is not uncomfortable for Vladimir Putin, and is uncomfortable for those who want him to take a different path. But maybe Phillips O'Brien is absolutely right. This is coming to a crunch where the European leaders who support Ukraine have to kind of put their cards down and say, this will not fly, we will take the slack, because it looks as if you are clearly not going to do that. And meanwhile, talking about a coalition of the willing being deployed in circumstances no one can even set out, while Vladimir Putin is saying that's not going to be allowed to happen. We have yet another meeting on what the coalition of the willing looks like. It's a circular debate.
But also be quite clear about this, that the proposal halving the size of the Ukrainian army and Ukraine having to give up its most potent weapons, that is basically just saying, this peace settlement puts Ukraine on notice to be rolled over by Russia at a date of President Putin's convenience. That's not acceptable, and I don't see why. I really don't see why that can't be spelt out by senior European politicians.